Marcus Chen had always been the joker in every group. At 23, he traveled through Europe with his college friends, and his camera roll was filled with videos of harmless pranks and funny moments. He loved making people laugh, and social media had become his stage. Every post needed to be more exciting than the last, every video more sharer. London was their 5th stop on the trip. The city buzzed with history and grandeur, and Marcus felt the familiar itch to create content that would go viral. His friends, Sarah and Jason, had grown tired of his constant filming, but they knew it was just who Marcus was. He never meant any harm. He just wanted to bring joy to people, even if his methods were sometimes questionable. On a cloudy Thursday morning, the group made their way to Buckingham Palace. Tourists crowded around the famous gates, cameras raised, hoping to catch a glimpse of the changing of the guard ceremony. Marcus pushed through the crowd with his phone held high, already planning his next post. The palace guards stood motionless in their red uniforms and tall bearskin hats, like statues brought to life. Sarah pulled at Marcus's sleeve. "Please don't do anything embarrassing," she whispered, already sensing his wheels turning. She knew that look in his eyes. It's the mischievous glint that appeared whenever he spotted an opportunity for content. Marcus grinned. "Relax. I'm just taking pictures like everyone else." But his backpack felt heavy with the small water spray bottle he had bought earlier that morning. It was one of those misting bottles people used to cool down in summer heat. He had seen videos online where tourists tried to make the stoic guards react, and he wanted to create his own version. The guard closest to them was a tall man, probably in his early 30s, with a stern face that showed no emotion. His name tag read Sergeant J. Matthews. He stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on some distant point, seemingly unaware of the hundreds of people photographing him. Marcus watched him for several minutes, impressed by the discipline it must take to remain so motionless. Jason noticed Marcus staring. "Don't even think about it, man. You'll get in trouble." "I'm just looking," Marcus replied, but his hand was already moving toward his backpack. The crowd around them shifted and murmured, some people trying to get closer, others pointing at different guards. Children tugged at their parents' hands, asking why the soldiers wouldn't move or smile. Marcus had done his research. He knew the guards weren't supposed to react to tourists, no matter what. They were trained to stand firm through all kinds of distractions. It was part of their duty, part of what made them legendary. He had watched countless videos of tourists making silly faces, dancing or shouting, all while the guards remained like stone. This would be different, Marcus thought. A quick spray of cool water, nothing harmful, just enough to get a reaction on camera. His followers would love it. The video would show the famous British composure, and everyone would laugh at the harmless prank. He had over 50,000 followers now, and this could push him over 100,000. Sarah was looking at the palace architecture, her attention diverted. Jason had walked a few feet away to buy a bottle of water from a vendor. This was his moment. Marcus pulled out the spray bottle, keeping it low and hidden from most angles. His heart raced with excitement and nervousness. He positioned his phone in his left hand, ready to record, and held the spray bottle in his right. The guard, Sergeant Matthews, remained perfectly still. His eyes showed no awareness of Marcus's presence, even though Marcus now stood just 6 feet away. The crowd provided cover, a sea of tourists that made Marcus feel invisible and bold. Marcus took a deep breath. This would only take a second. He raised his phone, pressed record, and whispered to himself, "Here goes nothing." His thumb found the trigger of the spray bottle, before he could think twice. Before he could consider the consequences or listen to the small voice in his head telling him to stop. Marcus squeezed the trigger 3 times in quick succession. A fine mist of water shot through the air, traveling the short distance to Sergeant Matthews's face. The droplets caught the pale London light, visible for just a moment before landing on the guard's cheeks and nose. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The crowd around them continued their chatter. Cameras clicked. A child laughed somewhere to Marcus's left. Sergeant Matthews stood frozen, water droplets slowly running down his face. His expression unchanged. Marcus felt a surge of disappointment. The guard wasn't going to react. The video would be boring, Just another failed attempt to break the famous British Guard composure. He almost lowered his phone, already thinking about deleting the footage. Then something changed. Sergeant Matthews's jaw tightened, just barely visible. His eyes, which had been staring straight ahead, shifted downward. They found Marcus. And in those eyes, Marcus saw something he hadn't expected. Not anger. Not irritation. Something deeper. Something that made his stomach drop and his smile fade. The guard's eyes began to glisten with moisture. That had nothing to do with the spray bottle. A single tear formed in the corner of his right eye, mixing with the water droplets already there. His lip trembled just for a fraction of a second before he regained control. But that moment was enough. The crowd near them began to notice. Whispers spread like wildfire. Marcus's phone was still recording, but his hand had started to shake. This wasn't the reaction he had wanted. This wasn't funny. The guard wasn't breaking character to laugh or yell. He was breaking because of something real, something painful that the water had triggered. The crowd's energy shifted in an instant. What had been cheerful tourist chatter turned into confused murmurs. People nearby turned their cameras towards Sergeant Matthews, sensing that something unusual was happening. The guard's military training fought against whatever emotion had been unlocked by such a simple act. Marcus stood frozen, his fingers still on the record button. He wanted to look away, to disappear into the crowd, but something held him in place. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was shock at seeing a response so different from what he had imagined. The guard's eyes remained locked on him. In that gaze, Marcus read an entire story he didn't yet understand. Sarah rushed back to Marcus's side, her face pale. She had seen what happened from a few feet away. "Marcus, what did you do?" Her voice was urgent, almost angry. She grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back into the safety of the anonymous crowd. But Marcus couldn't move. Sergeant Matthews's professional mask had cracked. And though he was clearly fighting to maintain his composure, the damage was done. Another tear escaped, rolling down his cheek beside the water droplets. His breathing had become slightly heavier, visible in the rise and fall of his chest beneath the red uniform. An older woman in the crowd gasped. "Is he crying? Why is the guard crying?" Her question rippled through the gathered tourists. Some people lowered their cameras, suddenly uncomfortable with recording what felt like a private moment of pain. Others, unfortunately, filmed more eagerly, sensing something that would trend on social media. Jason returned with his water bottle, took one look at the situation, and his face went white. "Oh no, Marcus. We need to go now." He understood before Sarah did that they might be in serious trouble. Disrespecting the Queen's Guard could lead to arrest. Whatever Marcus had done had clearly crossed a line. But before they could retreat, Sergeant Matthews did something that shocked everyone present. He broke protocol completely. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, reaching up to his face. He wiped away the tears and water with his white-gloved hand, streaking the fabric. Then, in a voice that carried despite being soft, he spoke. "It's the smell," he said, his words barely above a whisper, but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "That's the same spray she used." The crowd fell silent. Even the tourists who didn't speak English sensed the weight of the moment. Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest. She. Who was she? What had he stumbled into? Sergeant Matthews' commanding officer, who had been standing at attention 20 feet away, turned his head sharply at the break in protocol. His face showed concern mixed with confusion. He took a step forward, ready to intervene. But something in Matthews' expression made him pause. Marcus found his voice, though it came out weak and trembling. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, I didn't know." The words tumbled out, inadequate and small. The guard's eyes refocused on Marcus. For the first time, there was something other than pain in them. There was also a strange sort of recognition, as if he was seeing Marcus clearly for the first time. "You couldn't have known," Matthews said, his voice steadier now, but still carrying that emotional weight. "No one could have." Sarah, always the practical one, stepped forward slightly. "Is there something we can do? We're so sorry for whatever pain this caused." Her sincerity was evident, and several people in the crowd nodded in agreement. Sergeant Matthews straightened his posture, attempting to regain his professional bearing. but his eyes remained human, vulnerable, stripped of the stoic mask he had worn just minutes before. He looked at the crowd gathering around them, at the cameras still pointed in his direction, and made a decision that would change everything. "I need to tell you about Emily," he said quietly. The statement hung in the air like a confession. His commanding officer had now reached them, placing a hand on Matthews's shoulder, but Matthews shook his head gently. "Sir, I need to do this. People should know. They should understand why these pranks aren't just harmless fun." The officer hesitated, then nodded slowly. He had served with Matthews for 3 years, and had never seen him like this. "5 minutes, Sergeant? Then we get you relieved from duty." Marcus wanted to run. He wanted to disappear and delete the video and pretend this had never happened, but his feet wouldn't move. The guilt pressed down on him like a physical weight. Around them, the crowd had grown larger. Word had spread that something extraordinary was happening at the palace gates. Even other guards were glancing over, though they maintained their positions. Sergeant Matthews took a deep breath, his chest expanding beneath the red tunic. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the gathered crowd with military precision. But the emotion underneath was raw and real. 3 months ago, my daughter Emily was 8 years old. She had blonde hair that curled at the ends and a laugh that sounded like bells. He paused, swallowing hard. She loved coming to see me at work. She thought I was a prince, guarding a castle. On hot days, she would bring her little spray bottle, the one she used in the garden, and she would spray me to cool me down. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the London traffic seemed to fade into the background. Marcus felt tears pricking his own eyes, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. She had leukemia. We fought for 2 years, treatment after treatment. She was so brave, braver than any soldier I've ever served with. Matthews's voice broke slightly, but he pushed forward. The spray bottle had her favorite scent in it, lavender. Her mother grew it in our garden. Emily would mix the water with crushed lavender petals. Marcus's spray bottle slipped from his hand, hitting the cobblestones with a plastic clatter that sounded too loud in the silence. Lavender. The spray he had bought that morning had been labeled. Lavender Mist Refreshing Summer Spray. He had chosen it randomly from a shop, thinking only about how it would look on camera, how the mist would catch the light. Sergeant Matthews watched the bottle roll to a stop near his polished boots. The last time I saw Emily conscious, she was in her hospital bed. She was so weak, she could barely lift her arms. But she made her mother bring that spray bottle. She wanted to give me one last cool spray before I went to work. She knew I had to be here, standing guard. She understood duty even at 8 years old. A woman in the crowd began to cry openly. Others wiped at their eyes. Marcus felt like he might be sick. His prank, his stupid, thoughtless attempt at viral content, had ripped open a wound he couldn't have imagined existed. "I sprayed you with water because I thought it would be funny," Marcus said, his voice breaking. I never think. I just wanted people to laugh, to get views and likes. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Matthews looked at him directly, and there was no anger in his eyes. Just sadness and something that might have been understanding. "Do you know what the worst part is? When you sprayed me just now for one beautiful, terrible second, I thought she was back. That scent, that feeling of water mist on my face while I'm in uniform, my body remembered before my mind could. It remembered Emily." The commanding officer stepped forward gently. "James, let me get someone to relieve you. You've said enough." But Sergeant Matthews shook his head. "No, sir. If people are going to record this, if this is going to be shared online like everything else, then they need to hear all of it. They need to understand that we're not props for their entertainment. We're human beings with lives and losses and hearts that break." He turned to address the wider crowd now, his voice stronger. "I stand here every day in this uniform because it's my honor and my duty. I stand here even though my daughter's bedroom is empty now. I stand here even though coming to work reminds me of her visits, her laughter, her joy at seeing her dad as a palace prince. I stand here because some things are bigger than our pain." More phones were out now, but the energy had changed completely. People weren't recording for entertainment. They were documenting something real, something important. A moment of raw humanity in a world that too often reduced everything to content and clicks. Sarah had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Jason stood with his arms crossed, looking at the ground, his jaw clenched. And Marcus stood in the center of it all, the person who had unintentionally started this cascade of emotion. Feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Emily died 7 weeks ago, Matthews continued, his voice quieter now but still clear. 7 weeks and 3 days. The funeral was on a Tuesday. I took 2 weeks of bereavement leave, and then I came back to work because staying home in that empty house was unbearable. My wife and I were trying to figure out how to keep living in a world without our little girl. He paused, wiping his eyes again with his already damp glove. I didn't expect to break down today. I've stood through protests, through rude tourists, through people trying every trick to make me react. But that scent. His voice trailed off. That scent brought her back for just a moment, and losing her all over again. Marcus dropped to his knees on the cobblestones, not caring about the cameras or the crowd. Sir, I don't know what to say. I've been so stupid, so thoughtless. I thought I was just making funny content, but I never considered that you're a real person with a real life. I never thought about what you might be carrying inside while you stand here. Sergeant Matthews looked down at the young man kneeling before him. For a moment, everyone waited to see what would happen next. Would he accept the apology? Would he call for Marcus to be arrested? The tension was palpable. Then slowly, the guard did something that surprised everyone, including his commanding officer. He stepped forward, breaking his position entirely, and extended his hand to help Marcus up. Stand up, son, he said gently. Emily wouldn't have wanted you on your knees. Marcus took the offered hand and stood, feeling the strength in the guard's grip. They stood face to face, the young tourist and the grieving father, connected by a moment that had spiraled far beyond what either had anticipated. My daughter believed in kindness, Matthews said. She believed in second chances. She believed that people were good, even when they made mistakes. I have to honor that. I have to believe it too, or what was the point of everything she taught me? The crowd had swelled to nearly 200 people now. Traffic had slowed as drivers craned to see what was happening. Palace security was approaching, ready to manage the situation, but they moved slowly, sensing that something profound was unfolding. Marcus's phone was still recording. His hand had never left the button. But the video he was capturing now was nothing like what he had planned. This wasn't a prank video. This was something else entirely. An elderly man pushed through the crowd, his eyes wet with tears. I lost my son in Afghanistan, he said, his British accent thick with emotion. He was a soldier too. I know that grief, the kind that never fully heals. I see it in you, Sergeant. Matthews nodded at the man, a moment of recognition passing between two people who understood a particular shade of pain. Thank you, sir, and I'm sorry for your loss. Others began to speak up. A woman shared that she had lost her sister to cancer. A teenager mentioned his best friend who had died in a car accident. The gathering had transformed from an audience watching a spectacle into something closer to a vigil. A spontaneous memorial for lost loved ones. Sarah moved closer to Marcus, placing her hand on his shoulder. She could see him trembling, the weight of what he had done crushing down on him. Marcus, she whispered, maybe you should stop recording now. But Sergeant Matthews heard her and shook his head. No, let him record. Let people see. Maybe if enough people watch this, they'll think twice before treating guards. Yeah, or service workers, or anyone really, like they're not fully human. Maybe Emily's story can mean something. Jason spoke up for the first time, his voice rough. Sir, is there anything we can do? Any charity in Emily's name? Or any way we can help? Matthews's expression softened slightly. There's a children's cancer research fund at the hospital where Emily was treated. The Emily Matthews Research Fund. My wife set it up. Any contribution, no matter how small, would honor her memory. Marcus's mind was racing. This was his fault, his thoughtlessness that had caused this pain. But maybe, just maybe, he could turn it into something meaningful. Sir, I have 50,000 followers on social media. If I post this video, if I tell Emily's story the right way, we could raise awareness. We could raise money for the research fund." The guard studied Marcus's face for a long moment. "Would you tell her story with respect? Would you make it about her, not about getting views?" "Yes," Marcus said immediately. "I promise. No jokes, no tricks, just the truth. Just Emily's story and what I learned today about thinking before I act." Matthews considered this, then looked to his commanding officer, who had been quietly observing everything. The officer gave a small nod. "I think Emily would like that," Matthews said finally. "She always wanted to help other children. She used to say she was going to be a doctor when she grew up so she could fix all the sick kids." A police officer had arrived on the scene, likely called because of the growing crowd and the unusual situation. He approached the commanding officer, who quietly explained what had happened. The policeman looked at Marcus, then at Sergeant Matthews, then at the crowd of emotional tourists. "No formal complaint, then?" the officer asked Matthews. "No complaint," Matthews confirmed. "Just a young man who made a mistake and is trying to make it right." The policeman nodded and moved to help manage the crowd, which had now blocked part of the street. "All right, folks, let's give the sergeant some space. You've all been very understanding, but we need to clear the area." But before people began to disperse, something beautiful happened. Someone in the crowd began to clap. Then another joined. Then another. Within seconds, nearly 200 people were applauding Sergeant James Matthews. Not for his rigid discipline or his stoic performance, but for his humanity, his vulnerability, and his grace under the most difficult circumstances. Matthews stood at attention, tears flowing freely now, accepting the applause not for himself, but for his daughter. For Emily, who would never grow up to be a doctor, who would never spray her father with lavender water again, but whose story was now touching hundreds of people and would soon touch thousands more. Marcus filmed it all, tears running down his own face, his phone shaking in his hand. This was the most important content he would ever create, and for the first time, it wasn't about him. It was about something bigger, something that mattered. As the applause died down and the crowd began to slowly disperse, Matthews's commanding officer finally stepped in. "James, you're relieved from duty for the rest of the day. Go home. Be with Rachel. You've done more than enough." Matthews nodded, exhausted, but somehow lighter. He began to remove his bearskin hat, signaling the official end of his shift. But before he left, he turned to Marcus one final time. "Come with me for a moment," he said quietly. "I want to show you something." Marcus followed the guard to a small security station just inside the palace gates. The commanding officer accompanied them, along with Sarah and Jason. Inside, Matthews reached into his locker and pulled out his wallet. From it, he withdrew a small photograph, worn at the edges from being handled so often. The photograph showed a little girl with blonde curls and bright blue eyes, sitting on Sergeant Matthews's shoulders. She wore a plastic tiara and held a toy wand, while her father stood in his full guard uniform, both of them grinning at the camera. The joy in the image was so pure, so complete, that it made the current reality even more heartbreaking. "This was taken 2 years ago, before we knew she was sick," Matthews said softly. "She was 6. It was her birthday, and I had gotten special permission to have her visit during my shift. She told everyone she met that day that her dad was the bravest soldier in the whole world." Marcus looked at the photo, really looked at it. Seeing Emily not as a tragic figure in a story, but as a real child who had lived and loved and brought joy to everyone around her. "She was beautiful," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She was everything," Matthews replied, carefully returning the photo to his wallet. "When you post that video, when you tell this story, I want people to see this. I want them to see her smile and understand what was lost. Not just to make them sad, but to make them grateful for every moment they have with the people they love." Marcus nodded, understanding the responsibility he had been given. "I'll do it right. I promise." Matthews placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I believe you. You made a mistake today, but you're willing to own it and learn from it. That's more than most people would do. Emily would have liked you. She had a knack for seeing the good in people." They exchanged phone numbers and email addresses. Matthews would send Marcus more photos of Emily, information about the research fund, and details about the kind of little girl she had been. Marcus would craft the story carefully, working with Matthews to ensure it honored Emily's memory while also teaching the lesson that had been so painfully learned as they prepared to leave the palace grounds. Sarah pulled Marcus aside. "You know, this changes things, right? You can't go back to making prank videos after this." Marcus nodded. "I know I don't want to. This whole trip I've been so focused on content and followers that I forgot why I started making videos in the first place. I wanted to connect with people, to share experiences, to make the world feel a little smaller and friendlier. But somewhere along the way, it became about numbers and going viral instead of actual human connection." Jason joined them, his usual joking demeanor completely absent. "What happened today was heavy, man. But Matthews is right. If you tell this story well, it could actually matter. It could make people think before they do stupid stuff for likes." The three friends left Buckingham Palace that afternoon as different people than they had arrived. The London sky had cleared, and weak sunshine filtered through the remaining clouds. They walked in silence for a while, processing everything that had transpired. That evening, Marcus sat in their small hotel room and began to edit the video. But he didn't edit it the way he usually did, with quick cuts and trendy music and flashy text. Instead, he let the story unfold naturally. He included his own foolish act, not shying away from his mistake. He included Sergeant Matthews's tears and his words about Emily. He included the crowd's reaction and the spontaneous memorial that had formed. He wrote a long caption explaining what had happened, taking full responsibility for his thoughtlessness. And sharing the link to the Emily Matthews Research Fund, he included the photo Matthews had given him permission to share, the one of Emily on her father's shoulders, radiating joy and innocence. Before posting, Marcus showed the final video to Sarah and Jason. Both cried while watching it. "This is important," Sarah said. "This is the kind of content that actually changes things." Marcus posted the video at midnight London time. Within an hour, it had 1,000 views. By morning, it had reached 100,000. Comments flooded in. Not the usual jokes and emoji, but heartfelt messages. People shared their own stories of loss. They thanked Marcus for his honesty about his mistake. They donated to the research fund. 3 days later, the video had been viewed 10 million times. The Emily Matthews Research Fund had received over $500,000 in donations from people around the world. News outlets picked up the story, interviewing both Marcus and Sergeant Matthews. The conversation shifted from tourist pranks guard to a much deeper discussion about empathy, grief, and human dignity. Marcus and Sergeant Matthews stayed in touch. When Marcus returned home to the United States, he continued to share updates about the research fund and Emily's legacy. He completely changed the direction of his social media presence, using his platform to highlight meaningful stories and human connections rather than pranks and stunts. 6 months after that cloudy Thursday at Buckingham Palace, Marcus received a message from Matthews. The hospital had announced that the Emily Matthews Research Fund had grown large enough to fund a new wing dedicated to pediatric cancer treatment. They were naming it Emily's Hope Wing. The grand opening would be in 3 months. Matthews wanted Marcus to be there. Marcus bought a plane ticket immediately. At the opening ceremony, he stood beside Sergeant Matthews and his wife Rachel, watching as a plaque was unveiled with Emily's smiling face on it. The same photo from her 6th birthday, the one with the tiara and the toy wand. Rachel Matthews hugged Marcus tightly. "Thank you for telling her story," she said through tears. "Thank you for making sure she isn't forgotten, and that her life meant something beyond our family." Marcus couldn't speak past the lump in his throat, so he just hugged her back. This woman he had inadvertently hurt, but who had forgiven him and welcomed him into the most sacred part of her grief. That evening, Marcus posted one final video about Emily. In it, he stood in front of Emily's Hope Wing and reflected on how one thoughtless moment had changed his entire life. He talked about the importance of seeing people as people, not as props or obstacles or opportunities for content. He shared that he still made videos, but now they were about real connections, real stories. And making a positive impact, the video ended with Marcus at Buckingham Palace once again. But this time, he simply stood respectfully at a distance, watching Sergeant Matthews at his post. Matthews, back in full uniform and professional composure, stood guard with the same discipline as always. But now, pinned inside his tunic, invisible to the tourists, was a small photo of a little girl with blonde curls and a bright smile.